Hi everyone, welcome to a simple breakdown of the UK Constitution in 4 parts. Now throughout this video you may see some asterisks, but you shouldn't worry because they only signify terms or concepts that will be later explained. Now, what does the British Constitution look like? There are 5 sources that made up the Constitution: statute law, common law, conventions, authoritative work, and EU law. Statute laws are formal written laws that are made by the Parliament, passed by the two houses and the monarch, and are placed in the statute book. Its existence is somewhat similar to a fundamental law in the US, where it prevails if it is in conflict with another source. Constitutional statutes conditions a legal relationship between the citizen and the state in some general overarching manner which enlarges or diminishes the scope of what would now be regarded as fundamental constitutional rights. Here are a few examples. Magna Carta 1215 established that everyone, including the king, is subject to the law and protected the rights of the individuals, including habeas corpus. The Representation of the People's Act 1918 and 1928 reformed the electorate and extended the right to vote to women aged 21 or above. The Human Rights Act 1998, or otherwise known as the HRA, incorporated the European Convention of Human Rights (ECHR) into statute law, and the Fixed Term Parliament Act of 2011 stripped away the monarch's royal prerogative power to dissolve the parliament and introduced a Westminster general election every 5 years. Common laws are laws in court that are developed and applied by UK courts based on traditions, customs, and precedents that have become accepted practice. Courts are given the power to interpret and clarify law where there is no statute law, making common laws judge-made laws for future case reference. Government ministers may also clarify or amend common law through acts of parliament. Powers of the monarch, these rights have been limited over the years. The Act Case Proclamation 1610 defined limitations on royal prerogative, making the monarch only be able to make laws through the parliament. The Petition of Rights 1628 offered protections to the liberties in which the monarch is prohibited from infringing. One recent example would be the Fixed Term Parliament Act, in which the monarch would no longer have the power to dissolve the parliament. Stare decisis is the legal principle of determining points in litigation according to precedent that ensures cases with similar scenarios and facts are approached in the same way to avoid a misinterpretation of the law. These would then establish precedents for inferior courts to obey, as set by appellate court for jurisdiction and the Supreme Court. Examples of where common law would be practiced include burglary, murder, theft, manslaughter, arson, treason, and numerous others. Conventions are rules or norms considered to be binding and establish political behavior rooted in past experiences. They are neither codified nor enforced by British courts, so basically an imprecise guide to what is considered constitutional. But if ignored, there will be allegations of unconstitutional behavior leading to numerous political implications and constitutional difficulties, so truly a constitutional crisis. In 2011, the government released a cabinet manual. In 11 chapters, the manual clarified status of conventions and is intended as a guide to British constitution. Examples of conventions include monarch must give his or her royal consent to acts of parliament, the UK could not declare war without parliamentary vote, and the Salisbury Convention wherein the House of Lords could not vote down bills enacting the governing party's manifesto commitment, which have become accepted, essentially written versions of conventions. They help define what is politically proper and correct, but are not legally enforceable, despite the fact that they can be seen as guides to judiciary reviews. These work prove useful in interpreting the core values that underpin the uncodified constitution and shed light on obscure areas of constitutional practice in cases of conventions and how rules and principles should be applied in practice. Examples of these include Erskine May's Treatise on the Law, Privileges, Proceedings, and Usage of Parliament, 1844, which is commonly regarded as the Bible of parliamentary practices. Walter Bagshot's The English Constitution, 1867, that set out the role of the Cabinet and Prime Minister, and A.V. Dicey's An Introduction to the Study of the Law of the Constitution, 1884, that defines the relationship between the law and the 19th century British Constitution. The EU law is a particularly interesting topic considering now that the UK has formally exited the EU. Essentially, EU laws are laws made by Brussels, which the UK has agreed to accept when it joined the European Economic Community, also known as the EEC, in 1973. EU law normally takes precedence over UK law, but this is only done so with the permission of the UK. These laws after Brexit or after the negotiated expiry dates will no longer take precedence over UK laws, but before they become null, EU laws are still binding on the UK and are applicable by UK courts, despite the fact that some laws like the Monetary Union or the social chapters are not ratified in Britain. All include the Treaty of Rome 1957, the founding treaty of the EEC, which all member states once joined must subject to it. the Treaty of Accession, 1972, which allowed the UK, Ireland, and Denmark into the European Community. The Maastricht Treaty, 1982, that introduced the political union in form of the EU and opt-outs in EU policies, and the Treaty of Lisbon, 2009, which created an EU constitution as well as introduced a new decision-making arrangement. There are a lot of debates on the nature of the British Constitution as to if it should be codified or not, and so on. So here is an assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of the nature of the Constitution. That the British Constitution is strong due to its accountability to both the Parliament and to the wider electorate, and therefore there's no need to change. In general elections, voters choose between alternative governments where the unpopular ones can always be voted out. Its strong governance is advantageous, as the control that a governing party exercises over the legislative process made it able to implement most of its political objectives. The adaptability of the Constitution, too, is a strength because the Constitution, like an organic living body of rules, as argued by some conservative members, has evolved gradually in face of changing circumstances where pragmatic reforms are introduced when necessary. However, there are also people who argue that the nature of the Constitution is outdated and undemocratic, as key elements of the common law date back to medieval times, and the existence of hereditary peers in the House of Lords makes it hard to justify such hereditary principles in a democratic state. The lack of clarity also poses a weakness, as it is not always clear when the government has acted unconstitutionally, and the rights of the citizens are poorly defined and entrenched. Due to the government's control over the Parliament, it is also more than able to pass new acts that could overturn unfavorable Supreme Court rulings. The concentration of power also meant that there are fewer safeguards against an arbitrary exercise of state power, and the key tenets of the rule of law are not fully protected. A strong majority government would also be able to force through whatever legislation that they desire, which would effectively lead to what Lord Hailsham termed as an elective dictatorship.